A very good morning, everyone. Actually, it's good afternoon. I'm Dr. Surbi Madan, infectious diseases consultant from SIMS Hospital. So today we will be discussing on treatment of COVID-19. As we all know that COVID-19 is one of the greatest public health crises of this generation after the 1918 influenza outbreak. There are no proven effective treatment as of now due to the limitation of randomized controlled trial-based data. The drugs which are used at present for the treatment based on very few clinical studies and poor randomized data, there are a lot of concerns for potential toxicities, especially in the unmonitored settings. And lastly, the speed of 300 active clinical trials to investigate the potential treatment for COVID-19 actually highlights the need to produce high quality evidence even in the middle of the pandemic. So now how to manage COVID-19? Basically, there are different local policies which are existing in different states across the country. And most of the times these patients are getting admitted in COVID designated hospitals by the government. Now, it is very, very important to have our own institute-oriented policies. That is important because there are so many questions which should be answered by the triage. For example, which patient could be managed on the OPD basis, like those who are having mild disease without any comorbidities and risk factors? Which patients actually need hospital care and ICU care? Should all the patients be given COVID-19 directed treatment? And when could the patient be discharged from the hospital? Now, we will be discussing the treatment of COVID-19 under two headings. One is the general treatment related issues and the other is specific COVID directed treatment. Now, when we talk about general treatment issues, that will include first, now secondary bacterial infections have not been found to be a very, very prominent feature of COVID-19. And therefore, if we are giving empirical antibiotic treatment for CAP, that is reasonable, but don't choose very high antibiotics. Again, procalcitonin may not help to differentiate between a severe viral infection with COVID-19 and a bacterial infection because PCT has been found to be high. But always de-escalate once you get a confirmed diagnosis. Empirical oseltamivir is being given in many setups and has been advised in our government guidelines also. But of course, we should de-escalate once we get a confirmed report. Also, there has been reports of coexistence of influenza and COVID together in some of the patients. So we have to be very careful. Again, COVID has been associated with high hypercoagulability state. There are reports of pulmonary embolism. There are reports of increased D-dimer and other markers of dysregulated coagulation and DIC. Therefore, prophylaxis for venous thromboembolism to all hospitalized patients, at least those who are sick and in ICU, is justified. We should avoid nebulized medications and prefer to use meter dose inhalers to avoid the risk of aerosolization. Now, talking about the glucocorticoids. Now, we know that there has not been very strong data related to steroids in earlier viral infections, especially swine flu and SARS and MERS. And therefore, the WHO and CDC, they do not recommend a routine administration of glucocorticoids unless there is a separate evidence-based indication. However, they say that in critically ill patient, the data does suggest some potential benefit in patients with ARDS, and therefore the Society of Critical Care Medicine provides conditional week recommendation in patients with COVID-19 with ARDS, but they say that you begin steroids within 14 days, that is early initiation, low dose and short courses. Now, this is one study from China. This is a cohort study where they found that around 84 of the total 201 patients who had developed ARDS, amongst them, 50 patients were given, 23 of the 50 patients died who had received methylprednisolone, and 21 of 34 patients died who did not receive any methylprednisolone. So here you can see that they did find a statistically significant benefit with methylprednisolone in those patients who had ARDS. Now, this is our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare guideline, where again they say the same thing, that for patients with progressive deterioration of oxygenation indicators, rapid worsening on imaging, and excessive indication of body's inflammatory response, glucocorticoids can be used for a short period of time, and they advocate a dose of methylprednisolone or equivalent 1 to 2 milligrams per kg per day. Now we talk about the COVID-19 specific treatment. So this is the chart. This is the beautiful representation of the mechanism of entry of the virus into the host cell and how it synthesizes the various proteins, and how the viral assembly happens. And so basically there is an S protein which we all know by now, which is which targets the ACE2 receptor in the respiratory and GI mucosa of the human body. And the entry of the virus is also helped by a protease which is called TMPRSS2, and this helps the entry of the virus into the host cell. After endocytosis, there happens translation, polypeptides are synthesized, and then by the help of RNA-dependent RNA polymerase, structural proteins and hence the viral assembly, and after that exocytosis. So these are the various potential sites where different drugs can act against this virus and hence inhibit the viral entry, viral replication, and viral assembly, etc. So let's see these drugs one by one. So these, first we'll discuss about COVID-19 repurposed drugs, which we mean that these are the agents which have been previously used to treat SARS and MERS, and they are potential candidates to treat COVID-19. And meta-analysis of SARS and MERS treatment studies, they did not find any clear benefit of any specific regimen, but these have been found to be beneficial and in small studies. For example, chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, lopinavir, ritonavir, and umifenovir. Now, first we discuss about chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. Let us see what is the mechanism of action. So, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, they block viral entry into the host cell by inhibiting the glycosylation of the host receptors, by inhibiting the proteolytic processing and viral assembly, and they also lead to increase in the pH inside the lysosome. So they block the viral and the host cell fusion. So basically, as you can see here, it is acting at various sites, even before the viral entry at the level of endosome, and after the viral entry at the level of the proteolytic processing and the viral assembly. Also, there have been some immunomodulatory effect associated with chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine by inhibition of cytokine production, autophagy, and lysosomal activity in the host cells. Now, this is an in vitro study where they found that chloroquine was highly effective in reducing the viral replication with the effective concentration, that is EC90 of 6.9 micromoles, which was easily achievable with standard dosing due to its favorable penetration in tissue, including in the lung, where they found that the concentrations achieved by chloroquine in the lung were almost 200 to 700 times more than plasma. Now, these are the clinical studies from China, and the earlier results showed that chloroquine use might have been associated with reduced fever, increased resolution of lung lesions on the CT, and delayed disease progression in patients with COVID. What the dose which they used was 500 milligram BD for 10 days. The FDA has not approved chloroquine, but the doses which are recommended by FDA are 1 gram on day 1 and 500 milligram daily for 4 to 7 days. Now let us see about hydroxychloroquine. Now if we compare hydroxychloroquine to chloroquine, the in vitro studies suggest that the EC50, that is the maximal effective concentration which is needed by the hydroxychloroquine, is lower as compared to the chloroquine. And there is superior in vitro effect as compared to chloroquine when the drug was added prior to the viral challenge. Also, they found that the lung, blood, and plasma concentration of hydroxychloroquine were achieved faster as compared to chloroquine, which took almost 10 days. The doses which have been used in various studies are 400 milligram BD on day 1 as a loading dose, and then 200 milligram BD for 4 days. Alternative dosings are 400 milligram once a day for 5 days. And another study used 200 milligram 3 times a day for 10 days. So this is how hydroxychloroquine seems to be better as compared to chloroquine. Now these are the various clinical studies which have studied hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine for treatment. Basically hydroxychloroquine, not chloroquine. So these are the first two are the studies from France. The first is the study with the patient, 42 patients. Another study with 80 patients. Now the problem associated with this first study where they found that the virological clearance in patients with COVID was better in patients who were treated with hydroxychloroquine. 6 of them received a combination of azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine. However, there was no controls, there was no randomization, and the clinical data was, I mean, there were no the clinical outcomes were not reported, only the virological clearance was reported. Another big problem was that only 6 days of observation period was there. So we really don't know what is the importance of hydroxychloroquine outcomes in this study. Again, the next study is a little larger study, a study with patients, around 80 patients. There was a control, there was no control arm again here, though they did randomize, but there were no controls. Again, the clinical outcomes were not reported in this study also. This is a study from China of 30 patients where they did not find any benefit of hydroxychloroquine. In this study, again, a study from China with 62 patients, there they found a minimal statistical significance where they found that clinical outcomes were a little better with hydroxychloroquine. But again, this was a very, there is a very doubtful results, because there is, though it is randomized trial, there was no outcome, clinical outcomes were not reported. And if you see this trial where they have studied 181 patients, here they found that among the 84 patients which received hydroxychloroquine and 97 patients who did not receive hydroxychloroquine, the primary outcome, that is the transfer to ICU or death, was almost same, 20% and 22% in both the groups. Again, the percentage of patients who developed ARDS within 7 days was almost same, non-statistically significant in both the groups. Problem was that 8 patients who received hydroxychloroquine in the group, they did experience some ECG modification which required HCQ discontinuation. Similarly, this is an open label randomized trial. These are all preprints. They have not been peer reviewed yet, which is the problem with most of the data which is coming for COVID right now. So in this trial, there is, 150 patients, 75 received hydroxychloroquine with standard of care, and 75 received standard of care alone. And as you can see here, the doses received in hydroxychloroquine group are very high, 1200 milligram once a day for 3 days, followed by maintenance dose of 800 milligram per day for a treatment duration of 2 or 3 weeks for mild to moderate or severe patients respectively. Again, they did not find any difference in the 28-day negative conversion rate, and there was no difference in the symptoms alleviation rate at the end of 21 days. This is a very good article which came in Clinical Infectious Diseases, where the authors comment that despite the in vivo antiviral activity, there is no acute viral infection which has been successfully treated by chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine in humans yet. And both of these drugs did not show any anti-SARS-CoV effect in an in vivo model. Another theory which they propose is another hypothesis. What they say is that chloroquine reduces IL-2 production, and IL-2 plays a crucial role in the Th2 response in body, and Th2 could actually play a role in suppressing inflammation in COVID. So we really don't know whether chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine are really helpful or are they actually doing harm. And of course, we know that there are a lot of adverse events, at least theoretical concerns like QTc prolongation, hypoglycemia, neuropsychiatric effects, and retinopathy, though they are found in prolonged treatment with higher doses, but still we need to be very, very careful about when we give these drugs. So the American Association has proposed continuous monitoring of QTc in ECGs, the potassium has to be checked, and we need to be really careful about the side effects associated. This is a paper which is not related to treatment, but this is for prophylaxis, which has been advocated by ICMR in India. India is the only country where we are advocating prophylaxis for healthcare workers. So this came just yesterday in Lancet, and that's why I included, where they are very, very doubtful on the recommendation by ICMR about the healthcare workers prophylaxis. About hydroxychloroquine. The two major concerns are that there is no data at all, and secondly, that with the growing number of cases in the country, there are so many doctors and healthcare workers who are going to expose to the prophylaxis. Do we have any concrete system to monitor these healthcare workers regarding their ECGs and other side effects? So this is a huge concern associated with the prophylaxis. Now we talk about lopinavir ritonavir. This drug is a protease inhibitor, we all know. It's an ART used for treatment in HIV patients. It has got in vitro activity against novel coronaviruses by inhibition of the 3 chymotrypsin-like protease. However, there is no published in vitro data for SARS-CoV-2, that is novel coronavirus. Now, clinical studies which were associated in SARS also, they were associated with reduced mortality and intubation rates. But again, they were all poor quality studies, all retrospective and observational in nature. Now, this is a trial for COVID-19 which appeared in NEJM, which was a randomized trial of 199 patients where they did not find any benefit of lopinavir ritonavir pertaining to the clinical improvement or differences in the viral clearance or even 28-day mortality rates. Though there was some hint of benefit in lopinavir ritonavir arm when it was initiated very early in the course of illness. Now we talk about select investigational drugs. The first is remdesivir, which we are hearing a lot about in the data, a lot of studies coming on. So basically it's an RNA polymerase inhibitor and it's a broad spectrum drug. It has got activity against SARS, MERS, SARS-CoV-2, Ebola virus, Nipah virus and RSV. It gets incorporated into the nascent viral RNA chain and it results in the premature termination of the viral synthesis. However, it is not current FDA approved and it must be obtained via compassionate use only for children less than 18 years and pregnant women, expanded access or enrollment in a clinical trial. Of course, it is not available in our country. Now, this is an article which came up in NEJM where they found that in the patients where they use remdesivir in different countries like United States, Europe, Canada and Japan, they did find good results with this drug. Of course, there is no control here and they found that the mortality rate was, see, all these patients were very critical patients and therefore they have compared these patients with similar kind of patients, though no controls in these studies, but they found that the mortality rate was better in those patients who were giving remdesivir. The doses which are used are 200 milligram on day 1 and then 500 milligram every 24 hours. It is not recommended for patients who have GFR less than 30, though there are no other kidney and hepatic doses adjustments. Favipiravir is another drug which is a prodrug of a purine nucleotide. Again, it inhibits the viral replication and it inhibits the RNA polymerase. Again, most of the data are derived from its influenza and Ebola activity. There are some studies, but it is currently available only in Japan. Tocilizumab, again, it is an IL-6 receptor antagonist, basically a monoclonal antibody, and it has been used in small series of COVID-19 cases with early reports of success. So in a report of 29 patients which came from China, they found that this drug, when it was used in patients who were severely ill, it did show clinical improvement in 91% of the patients as measured by improved respiratory function, rapid defervescence and successful discharge. So again, there is no comparator group. So we really need good data for this drug also. The principle of using this drug is that we have found raised IL-6 interleukin-6 levels. We all know that severe COVID is associated with the cytokine storm. So there may be a role of this drug in severely ill patients. And lastly, about convalescent plasma. So what is convalescent plasma? Basically, it is the plasma of those patients who have recovered from COVID, and there is a cutoff of IgG and the neutralizing antibodies and other antibodies which has to be there before we can use the plasma of these patients for the treatment. So there is a series of 5 and 15 and 10 patients, so total 15 patients where they have found some promising results with convalescent plasma, and today only our government also has given recommendations that those who want to enroll, ICMR has already made a protocol for how to enroll in the trial. Now, there are other agents like umifenovir, ribavirin, and nitazoxanide, camostate, even ivermectin, which I won't go into the details. So these are all investigational agents in trials. And lastly, you can all start putting in your questions in the chat box, as this is my last slide. Lastly, what does our government say? What is our Ministry of Health and Family Welfare recommends? So they say that no specific antivirals have been approved to be effective as per currently available data. However, based on the available information, the following drugs may be considered as an off-label. That is hydroxychloroquine, 400 milligram day 1, followed by 200 milligram BD for 4 days, in combination with azithromycin for 5 days, 500 milligram per day. They again ask you to use it with monitoring the QTC interval, not recommended for children less than 12 years and pregnant